And Craig Smoak.
All right, here we go. 4 o'clock hour. Thanks to Grant Taft. Jeremiah Dickey joins us 5:30. The chat room's been going nuts all of a sudden. It's about Oklahoma State and Texas, which is an interesting game, of course, in the pecking order of the Big 12, especially after the craziness in the Cotton Bowl. And you just heard the kick, the field goal, A&M beating Alabama. We'll get to all of that with Max in a moment. But Max and theathletic.com, Mitch Sherman, among others, this series about coaching searches and what the background is. Tennessee, they went through that dumpster fire. Steve Peterson, Nebraska, it was embarrassing. They couldn't get anybody to go to Lincoln. Max, did you basically just break the hearts of every Nebraska fan with that one yesterday?
Smokey, thank you for having me on. I knew you'd want to lead with this. I know you want to. I mean, we can do like a whole 20-minute session on just that story if you want.
No, people don't want to hear
just unpack all of it. But no, they've responded quite well. I think that around Nebraska, Steve Peterson. The goal of this piece is not to villainize them any more than folks already do. But I think it's. I love writing about coaching carousel stuff, and sort of like the series we're doing is Secrets of the Coaching Carousel, and lots of a big variety of just different stories about past hires, how they get done, all that stuff, and I really enjoy it, and obviously you guys have a good one there, and an AD that knows how to handle those in a very sharp and professional way, but certainly the one at Nebraska in 03 is kind of the one of those sort of cautionary tales of everything that can go wrong in a search.
Well, we're not going to discuss that much more, but I love the series, by the way. Theathletic.com is doing a great job with the search
but
stories.
Thank you.
But, Max, would you say that the common thread is an athletic director that either doesn't quite know what he's doing yet or whatever note he's doing and gets pushed in maybe also gets pushed in the wrong direction by over-enthusiastic boosters?
I think that the Nebraska one in 03 has got a lot of the things that we've learned these lessons over and over the years, and they got them wrong. One of them is obviously if you're going to fire somebody, it's a lot smarter to have somebody lined up to take their place if you're going to pull it off. And Nebraska, that wasn't the case. They thought that they could get Mike Sherman away from the Green Bay Packers, which was just nonsense. I think that in that one they aimed too high in terms of some of the people they were going for. They decided that they needed to hire an NFL coach, which I think was pretty limiting in terms of how they went about it. And certainly I think they overestimated a little bit in terms of just how, the job hadn't opened up since 1962. So they didn't really have any sense of, it pays well and it's prominent and all that stuff, but they didn't really know how coaches and coaches and agents and stuff would respond to it, especially after you fire a 9-3 coach. So, yeah, a lot of stuff didn't go right, and they ended up hiring their fifth choice, Bill Callahan, and that didn't go so well either.
So, Max, Red River was crazy, obviously. A lot of craziness last Saturday, but just what do you make of, the game itself and all the fallout for Oklahoma? I mean, Caleb Williams and Spencer Rattler, that's an interesting dynamic, not to mention the student newspaper dust-up that's already led to. And then for Texas, a nice opportunity to turn around and be at home against Oklahoma State. But at the same time, that was a tough loss for them. There's no doubt about it. So your thoughts on those two exiting Dallas last weekend?
Yeah, it's really nuts. One of the best Red River games we've ever seen. I wonder if Texas pulls that off, are we talking about them as the best team in the Big 12 right now? Instead, it's kind of back to normal for Texas here, and we'll see, how beat up they are. Can they kind of rally and step up to the challenge here this week at home against Oklahoma State in what I think should be a really competitive game? But certainly Texas did some things right in that game, but just got worn out on defense in the second half and couldn't hold on there. But just bunch of crazy performances in that one. And then the Oklahoma stuff, truly one of the more fascinating stories in all college football that we'll probably see all season long. I mean, I just never would have guessed that things would go like this for Spencer Rattler this year, considering where we started here with, all the Heisman and number one pick hype and all that stuff. And I don't think people were wrong about that. I don't think I was wrong about that. I think it's just, he hasn't been as sharp as you sort of thought he'd be in taking that next step as a second-year starter. And, man, we found out Caleb Williams is pretty damn good. I watching that game, I kept waiting for him to really make that that brutal freshman mistake because the kid just hadn't really played at all, and he didn't even play last year because his high school senior season got canceled, and he just kept balling. It's really crazy, and now I think Riley will probably go with Caleb Williams, but you have to handle that in a way where I'm sure you want to keep Rattler available and ready and not totally checked out and depressed here.
Max Olson, again, theathletic.com. It was an unbelievable game. And then later that night, okay, hold my beer. You had A&M and Alabama, and what A&M was able to do with the win for Jimbo Fisher, because it looked like they were headed to 0-3 in conference play, and now they're kind of at least, hey, don't forget about us.
Yeah, I was at that game, and, I went to it sort of expecting, like, all right, well, we'll see how long A&M can hang in there against Alabama. I figured – I didn't think it'd be a blowout, but I thought that, A&M was probably heading towards their third straight loss. And, does that night, reflect that they're going to, win out from here? I have no idea. But, man, that's what we love about this sport is you can have, that's why you play the games. You can have that one perfect night when everything kind of goes right for you, where you've got that great plan to sort of attack the weaknesses of your very talented opponent, and if you can sort of squeeze the best possible performance out of your quarterback, and man, Zach Calzada played the game of his life against Alabama. Just so impressed, and really just being down there on the field is very nice. Like, happy for that fan base, happy for those players and stuff, and certainly that's a massive one for the future of the program there for the Aggies. But wild to watch, and I don't know, with Alabama, I feel like they're kind of a year away. At some point, maybe you lose enough guys to the NFL, and you're replacing the quarterbacks and stuff that some years you're not going to have that best in the country kind of team, and that's what it kind of feels like. I feel like after watching Bama, Bryce Young was impressive and stuff, but I'd be shocked if Georgia's not the playoff team out of that conference.
Max, I've heard, I've seen a lot of Bama fans say that their team seems aloof. That maybe they're not as engaged. Now I don't know that to be true or not. I mean, they didn't seem aloof against Ole Miss. They didn't seem aloof for a good majority of the second half against A&M. But do you think that maybe Nick Saban does, like everybody else, has to, like you said, a year away, just maybe have a little time to reset things?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to just have like a real senior heavy experienced team every single year, as well as Alabama recruits. You're still going to lose guys, and you're still going to have guys go pro after 3 years. They're going to have that more than anybody just because of the caliber of athletes they're bringing in. So I just think Bryce Young looked good, but he's still growing, he's still improving, he still hasn't played that much. Like, their best players on that team are sophomores. So I mean, I don't think Bama's in trouble. I don't think the dynasty's dead or anything like that. You look at that draft. The last two drafts and how many first rounders they've lost. I mean, at some point, that catches up to you a little bit, and you've got to develop that next group of stars. And they're going to do that with this team. But I just, they've got, when you watch the guys, especially playing right now in the league, and how like Sertan and Diggs and the whiteouts and Najee Harrison, they've just lost some really, really good players over these last 2 years, and now you've developed that new core group that's going to be just as good as them. But it doesn't seem to me like a super veteran team right now, and one that has got some more growing up to do.
Max, I've said this before. They dropped to what, number 5 or 6 after the loss to an unranked team. Yes, a team that had injuries, but an unranked team. Penn State dropped 4 spots, and they lost on the road to number 3. Is there almost, not a fear, but is there almost a protectionism? And I wouldn't bet against Nick Saban and Alabama getting themselves back together. I mean, they lost a game in a last-second field goal. But is there some sort of, at times, a protectionism, like people are afraid that there's a chance they could have a college football playoff and Alabama's not involved?
Well, I mean, I'm not an AP voter. I don't know how people look at that stuff when they put it together. It is always hard to know how far to drop a team down. And I mean, you're seeing it now. Like, people are bringing Ohio State right back up into that top 5-6 range again, just because they've strung together some easy wins and stuff. I think that we have a tendency, and maybe recruiting plays into this a lot, and just this perception of who the most talented teams are, based on 24/7 stars and all that kind of stuff. But I think there is still a tendency, and maybe the playoff reinforces this, that Alabama and Ohio State and all them are still belong in that kind of top 5 conversation even with one loss because they're just better than everybody else. They're just more talented. And this is the kind of year where it feels like you kind of shake up the norm there, where you could have Iowa or Cincinnati or some of these teams actually get in and deserve to get in there. But yeah, I get why that's frustrating to people that you don't drop Bama that much. I think I probably would have dropped them to like 7th or so, and that maybe that's too low in the eyes of some people. But this is also a weird year where there's been enough upsets that those teams are going to bounce right back up.
Georgia and Kentucky is the marquee game this week, Max, and I don't think anybody would have picked that to necessarily a marquee game, even though Kentucky going in looked improved with Mark Stoops. What do you think about that game, and do you think that Mark Stoops will still be at Kentucky in a year or two?
Yeah, I mean, it's the middle of the season now, but that looks like it's going to be for the division there. Certainly that game between Georgia and Kentucky. And, I think that Georgia's just continued to be so impressive. It really doesn't even matter, like, what's going on with their quarterback situation and how those guys are playing because, they can just absolutely stomp you on defense and run the ball with 4 blue-chip running backs and a good offensive line and all that. And run you over and still balance all that out with an explosive passing game. So I think Georgia will handle this one. Kentucky's been fun to watch. They've won some close games. Certainly that game against LSU was quite a statement and really puts Coach O in a bit of peril there with that one. But I think Mark Stoops has done an awesome job. Some of my colleagues like to argue that Kentucky is the best job in the country because you can win 7-8 games a year and everyone's really, really happy with you. And, no one gets that. Like there's not that expectation and stress that you have to be in the SEC title game and the playoff team and all that. So Mark Stoops has got it pretty good, but you would think he's the kind of coach that more and more schools should target for those big time openings. Cause I think that just as a program builder, has done a really, really sharp job there in Kentucky at going to a basketball school and giving them a really legitimate football program.
Max, Baylor bounced back in a nice way after that loss to Oklahoma State, just demolished West Virginia at home. Now number 19, BYU, comes rolling in. They obviously are now coming off of a loss to Boise State in which they didn't play particularly well, turned it over too much. What are your thoughts on the Cougs and the Bears in a preview of the future Big 12?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a bummer that BYU lost last week just to take a little bit of the hype off that game. But, I mean, I think that it's a great opportunity for Baylor. I think Baylor, to me, has looked like a top 25 caliber team, and I think probably will be back in that mix here pretty soon. I think that this is a great – like, I kind of think, we all know about sort of like the unique, matchup elements of this one, but I kind of think that's an advantage to Baylor just in having that better sense of scheme and personnel on BYU. I know that kind of goes both ways, but I think this is a good spot for Baylor. I think they're going to win this week, and I just, as we see, I've just been so impressed by Bohannon, the way he's continued to take this job and run with it and keep improving. And Baylor's just doing a lot of things right in all phases, and that I think it's going to give them a chance to be very competitive in this Big 12 race, and which does still feel pretty wide open. And this one doesn't affect that race, obviously, but I think it's a good chance to sort of get some more national attention.
What do you think's going on at LSU? What do you think this is?
Well, they barely have any players left at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, so many guys are hurt, it seems like.
They got guys hurt?
They're just going through it. I mean, it's just an awfully unlucky year in a lot of ways. I think once again, you could look at it and say, okay, did they make the right coaching hires? I mean, that still remains to be seen. They've still been kind of trying to chase that magic of 2019 where it all clicked together. But yeah, to lose the guys they've lost, to not have Keishawn Butte and Derek Stingley and Eli Ricks and now their best pass rushers out for the season too. I think it's just kind of a season from hell, and we have a few of these every year in college football where you've got a team that has the talent to have a top 25 kind of season, maybe even be in LSU's case, maybe it's sort of a dark horse playoff team, but everything is kind of broke the wrong way from the very start there, where you remember they had to leave town and go to Houston to get ready for their game at UCLA because of the hurricane there. So it's just been as brutal a start as you could possibly have for LSU, and with the schedule ahead there, it's not going to get any better.
What kind of coach would you look for to replace Ed Orgeron? Because he's a CEO coach. You know, he had great assistants in Joe Brady and Dave Aranda and others that are all gone now and did not replace them as well. Do you want a less of a CEO coach to take over for him if you're LSU, or do you get another one that can hire some great assistants again?
Well, first of all, let me flip that, because I've been thinking about this. What's the right job for Coach O after this?
Good question.
That's a really good question.
I mean, he's got kind of a unique resume here. It's like he's not going to go be a DC for somebody and or D-line coach, I wouldn't think. So I'm curious what kind of job makes sense for him, whether it's college or NFL. But you know, I think with LSU, you know, the expectation is super, super high. You know, they want national title contention. They want to recruit at the top 5 level. They know that at that program, you have one of the most advantageous recruiting situations in the country because of just how many studs come out of their state. So I have to think that, you know, when we did the top 5 jobs thing, certainly you get a lot of votes for LSU because there's a perception that, you know, I mean, especially with the way you look at Les Miles and maybe people would throw Orgeron on that, but you especially look at Les Miles and say, like, man, you can kind of make the argument that anybody can win there with how it's set up there. And, you know, certainly when the last 3 coaches that they've had have won national championships, that's one of the best jobs out there. And I don't know. I don't know what's the perfect fit for LSU. I'm sure people will throw Lane Kiffin out there. I don't know, you know, like you've got the Woodward Jimbo Fisher connection. Obviously, I'm not sure he would go there, although Jimbo could leave for free, but that's a job that's going to certainly command a ton of interest if it opens up. And you would think that they'd have a chance at the best of the best, but you know, that wasn't, you know, last time they went for Tom Herman and whiffed on him and settled for Orgeron. I'd be very fascinated to see which kind of coaches would be willing to leave for LSU this year.
Max, one thing for me, and it's the level of play in college football. Some teams, of course, are struggle, but we saw some big boys even last year have their issues. Are we seeing so many great games because everyone's back to normal, even though there are still some hiccups along the way? Is this kind of been one of those years that's even more special because everything is closer to normal?
I think so. I mean, I think that the two games I've gone to this season, other than, you know, wearing a mask in the press box, it's felt pretty normal in terms of just the game day vibe and all that kind of stuff. And that's very appreciated. It's been really fun. I think what we're seeing this season from like the parity standpoint probably goes back to the thing that is just so unprecedented, and that's how experienced some of these teams are, because you've got all these super seniors back. You had, you know, fewer players go into the draft last year than typical by far. And, you know, I think some of these teams that are doing really well this year and climbing up into the top 10 and stuff are teams that have a lot of guys back. They were able to get seniors to come back and build more experienced rosters than they would have expected. And I think that's paying off quite a bit. But for me, like it's fun to watch because you've got that going on. You've got obviously at places like, you know, like at Ohio State or Clemson or Bama, you know, you're going through some changes here. LSU is certainly one of them. It's a fun time here, I think, where, you know, I think if we have like a pretty surprising playoff field, I don't think that's a bad thing. As much as people may care about TV ratings or who deserves it or whatever, like I think this might be a year where we're setting up for a pretty random kind of Final Four here, which would be a lot of fun.
Thank you, Max. Appreciate your time as always. Thursdays at 4, one of the lead college football writers for theathletic.com with us, and they are going through a series of history of how certain coaching searches went down. And they even have one that was written that's interesting about college football, the toughest jobs for head coaches in college football. And it's not just because a program might win or the expectations are crazy, but also the ones that just can never win no matter who you are.
I think number one in the survey of coaches and administrators was Vanderbilt, because Vanderbilt, the teams around them are never going to all of a sudden get worse enough. They're like Baylor, and I'm not knocking Art Briles here, but Baylor had the benefit of a slight Oklahoma and Texas dip, right, as Art Briles was bringing them into their ascendancy. Vanderbilt's not going to have enough teams do that to get to that level that Baylor was, where they were knocking on the door of being in the college football playoff. There's just too many obstacles in their way. Now they can be good, and they have been good in certain years, but to be consistently good is really hard for Vanderbilt, given their academic standards. And most of it, like they even said in the thing, a lot of things is most of the people are just fine with it. Like there's not a big push for Vanderbilt to be great at athletics because of who they are. The other thing was Texas was on both lists.
Yeah.
Of the best jobs and the hardest job, the worst jobs. And for the best job, for almost the same reason. The best job, you have all this financial support, and you're in a state full of recruiting talent, and they love football and all this. And then the other side is, well, they have all that enthusiasm and talent and all that also comes because they have expectations. And the Texas expectations are, we'll let you lose once a year, but after that, what are you doing with your life?
And they have lost 4, 3, 5, 7 games a year now for over a decade.
I thought Urban's comments about the whole Solich thing were really interesting. I know he's not a popular figure right now, but I think he said what everybody said. He's like, are you kidding me? You win 9 games, you do it the right way, he seemed really disgusted by what Nebraska did with Frank Solich, and I'm sure he was not alone. In fact, I know he's not alone, but that was interesting to look back on his comments from all those years ago and what he was thinking. And that was not Urban Meyer now. That wasn't like Florida national title Urban and all that. That was a much younger Urban Meyer, but yeah, you can tell a lot of people were put off by the way Nebraska handled Frank Solich.
And they've never been the same. They've never been close to the same. They've had teams that have won 9 or 10 games a couple of times with Pelini, whatever. The one note about Kansas being one of the hardest Power 5 places, this is the great quote. Mark Mangino needs 2 statues. Now, some people could then insert a joke there. They went to the Orange Bowl and won. They fired him because he was mean.
Yep. They fired him because he was mean.
They were on the precipice of playing in the national championship game. They were that close. They beat a team that had bludgeoned them years for decades and decades in Nebraska and put 70 up on them. And they have not, of course. We've seen what's happened to them ever since.
I could not help but laugh, looking back at the old Obi the Orange and Mark Mangino side. I remember when those were going around a lot. But, yeah, Mangino, it's looking back on it now and where Kansas is, pretty freaking amazing. He had them in the spot that they were in at that time. And what was that quarterback's name?
Todd Reesing.
Yeah, Todd Reesing was very good, and they were legit. They were a legit team, and it's kind of hard to imagine it now. It's almost like it didn't really happen, but it did. And, I like Lance Leipold, and I think for them it's just a matter of every week just trying to get a little bit better. They get Texas Tech this weekend, and things are bad enough in Lubbock at least that I know most Tech fans are probably like, no way we lose this game. Like, no matter what, there's no way we lose this game. But there's enough doubt surrounding Matt Wells, and they're so beat up that, going on the road, Kansas has had 2 weeks off, and I'm not predicting an upset by any means, but I'm just saying if you're Kansas, this is probably your best opportunity to try and get a win this year.
Yeah, and Kansas, I just hope for their football program's sake that they leave the coach alone for about 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
Understanding that sometimes, I think that's what Tennessee's problem was, or a lot of problems, that if you've had 4 coaches, that's why I completely support Jim Harbaugh staying at Michigan until at least towards the end of that contract, because 2 bad coaches in a row there in Brady Hoke and Rich Rodriguez, that can really torch a program, especially when your rival has little minor hiccups between Jim Tressel and Urban Meyer, and between Urban Meyer and Ryan Day. They're rolling along. They haven't slowed down. You've slowed down to a crawl, and to get him back to a certain point and get him 9 wins a season is good. Just give him time to do what he has to do. And in the program, the case of Kansas, they've had a good coach since Mark Mangino, and they've had 5 of them since then. So you're talking about 5 guys just throwing, gunk in the gears. Well, it takes somebody a time to rebuild that. And to be like, well, we haven't seen significant improvement. Look, they got to clear out a lot of tumors. It's going to take time.
Well, the Les Miles thing set them back even more because they thought maybe he could at least recreate a little magic or at least try to start them on the way back.
That was a splash hire.
Yeah, it was. Kansas needs to become transfer you, keep their coach. They will make a bowl eventually. Let me go over some of the chat room because we have to catch up on a little bit of that. We've gone to the text line as well. By the way,